REST API stands for Representable State Transfer. It is an architectural style of networked systems. It is not a standard itself, but it does use a standard such as HTTP, URL, or XML. RESTful APIs follow 6 constraints: uniform interface, stateless, cacheable, client-server, layered system, and optionally code on demand. The uniform system is that all API calls use a standard HTTP request: get, post, put, and delete. Get is for retrieving data from the API, post is for adding data to the API, put is for updating or adding data to the API, and delete is for removing data on the API. Stateless is the fact that the information kept on the API is not in any state at all. So each call or action is not based on a previous call or any state that the API currently is in. Cacheable is that the RESTful API must specify and enforce whether they are cacheable or not. This controls whether the client can function with or without stale data that they have retrieved. Client-server basically is the separation between the client side and the server side. For example, the client should not be concerned with the server's storage issues, and vice versa. The server should not be concerned about implementation or state. Layered system has to do with the client not being concerned of what it is essentially connected to. The client can be connected to the end server that is representing the API, but it could also be only connected to a load balancer or a middleman server that's redirecting them to the actual API. The last constraint is code on demand, which is actually an optional constraint as it's not currently implemented in a lot of RESTful APIs currently. The idea of code on demand is to send actual runnable code as the return content for the API to be executed by the client. The idea of this is to reduce the content needed in the initial call of a website.
We're going to be using BulletPHP, which is a MVC-based microframework specifically designed for API design. So I'm going to show you how to set up BulletPHP and start designing your API. First, we're going to have to install Composer. So you can go to getcomposer.org. Now I'm going to assume that you have at least PHP 5.3.2 installed. This is a Composer requirement. And also PHP 5.3.2 or newer requires Apache 2.4. So I'm assuming that you have all of that installed and set up. Now to install Composer, go ahead and select the download link. Now I'm using Windows, so I'm going to scroll down to the Windows installer and select composersetup.exe. It should download. And once the download is complete, go ahead and select it. Now, we're going to want to use Composer from the command line, and that's selected by default. If you like, you can install shell menus, which allows you to use Composer commands from a right-click menu within Windows Explorer, but I'm not going to this time. It should automatically find your PHP path when it's installed, but if not, you can go ahead and browse to it. It'll review your settings, and when you're ready to install, go ahead and click Install. Once you've installed Composer, you can go ahead and create a folder for your BulletPHP project. Now, within this folder, we need to create a composer.json file. I'm going to do that using Notepad++. And I'm copying this straight from the BulletPHP installation instructions. So you can find that at bulletphp.com on the installation link. So here's my composer.json file. My htdocs folder. And we're going to call this composer.json. So with that saved, I'm going to open command line and enter composer update. Once that's complete, we need to add our htaccess file. I'm going to create that from inside of Notepad++ as well. And again, I'm copying this straight from the BulletPHP website. However, I noticed that the PHP file does not load correctly with the included rewrite rule. So I'm going to replace it with these two statements. Next, I'm going to create my index.php file. Now, this is where we start using some of Bullet's functions. Essentially, we're creating a function that returns hello world and then echoing what that returns. So now that we've added our necessary files to our BulletPHP project, we're going to want to edit our Apache configuration file, httpd.conf. We're going to add our project as a virtual host. So search for virtual hosts in your httpd.conf file, and you'll find this line. Make sure to uncomment the include line. It includes the httpd-vhost.conf file. Now, we're going to edit that one. It's under Apache conf extra. And you can add your project as a virtual host or virtual server. So I've already added some, but I'm going to add our new project as a virtual host. So in your opening tag, type *:80, which will allow you to use localhost as your virtual host, so you don't have to use a separate IP. Now you want to add a server name. I'm going to call mine Bullet, and a server path, the same. And then we're going to add our document root. And this is where we're actually keeping our project. Now we're going to want to create a directory object, which allows us to use our htaccess file that we created to rewrite our URL as necessary for our API. The next thing we want to do, so that you can just type in our server name, Bullet, into a browser, is edit our Windows hosts file. So you can find that under Windows, System32, drivers, etc. And here's the file hosts. We're going to edit that and add our localhost IP and the name of our server, Bullet. So save that, restart your Apache service, and once that's complete, you should be able to just navigate to your server name, and there you go. It says hello world, just like we wrote in our function.
Alright, so this is going to be a quick demonstration of using the BulletPHP framework to create an API. I've added in here a names path along with a get and post function for our test purposes here. For our get function, we are using a text file to act as our database in this situation. Basically, what the get function is doing is searching through our database text file and trying to find matches to parameters that are passed through the URL. In the post function does basically the opposite, where it is taking the data given in the URL and adds it to the text file. So first I'm going to demonstrate here just the post function. I'm going to assume you have curl already installed. You can carry it out such as this. So basically the command here is curl, I is just to be verbose, an X to specify that we are posting to this location, which from the setup you'll know is in localhost, BulletPHP, and then names, which is the path that we created here on the outside. And then we're going to change this name here. So let's add James Franco to our database. Enter, and it has now sent it and saved it to that text file. Now using the get function, we can actually load it in the browser. If we go to the same location in our names route that we've created, we can now tell it that we're going to pass it a parameter. A slug is the keyword used by BulletPHP to represent string inputs. For if you wanted to do numerical inputs, you would use int. But for our case, we're going to stick with strings since we put in a string data. So if we now search our get, you can see now we have found him. Now we can also, because the search function is just matching words, say I only know his first name, and we still get. Now I've added some other values in here as well. So if I do a more general search, say only looking for N, we can see, including James Franco, a whole bunch of other users in the file. And that is basically the functioning of this simple API.